Hey, I'm Raleigh Ann Gray, Senior Director of Athlete Exchange at Wasserman, and I am so excited to join you for Virtual Networking 101. We'll discuss everything from practical tips to how to handle networking in the wild time that is COVID. Rerun will be there. I hope you'll be there too.
Yikes. Are we ready to roll?
We are ready.
What's up, guys? Rerun is crying at the door right now because his father is supposed to be taking him on a walk while we dive into some virtual networking. But as mentioned, and Austin, thank you for sharing such a lovely video of me shot randomly on a Saturday morning. But yeah, so excited to be joining you guys. And I know Austin mentioned, but want to make sure this is a good use of y'all's time. We have some stuff to go over, and I want to be certain to provide some clear, actionable things and talk through some of the ways I've seen some really great networking since all of this madness started, particularly when Adam Silver shut down the world on March 11th. But this is y'all's time. I want to make sure it's productive. No question is out of line. So please feel free to drop those into the Q&A function that you see below. And I wish I could see all y'all's faces, but another time. I am going to share my screen just to give you a rundown of who the hell you're talking to this morning. And then a little bit more, as I mentioned, on some tactical things, stuff that I've seen working. But again, drop in their questions and nothing's off limits. So excited to see y'all. So with that, oops, as we discussed, I need to unplug my second screen here. But diving in, I'm gonna share this with you guys real quick. And the classic, can you see my screen question that is part of COVID these days. So again, I'm Raleigh Ann Gray. I am usually based in Charlotte, North Carolina, or on an airplane between New York and LA. But at present, I'm actually in Colorado. So if you're swinging through, let me know. But wanted to share a little bit about my career journey, just so you guys have an understanding. I went to the University of Virginia. I don't know if we've got any Wahoos or ACC folks on the line. If you want to drop even in the Q&A, just how that's going in terms of all of the sports stuff. Virginia hasn't even played a football game yet because we've had them all pushed back. But I worked in the sports information department at Virginia after having absolutely destroyed my knee. I was there to play soccer and did not do that. But I worked in the sports information department, sort of pivoted in that way, and really identified that I wanted to go into sports as a career early on. And you guys may be the same, where you just have a moment that you've identified, like, this is exactly what I want to do. And because I did that, I was lucky enough to really start networking early. And I will go ahead and say what you guys already know. Networking sometimes sounds like a really dirty word, right? Like, it sounds like you're just trying to get in touch with somebody because you need something from them. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but I think the best version of networking is getting to know people when you don't need anything, right? When you just want to learn about what they're up to. And the coolest time to do that is right now, because you're not asking for a job yet. You would be asking to help them with something or getting on the road to an internship, but you're really just trying to identify what you're interested in, and people are really open to sharing. That's why I'm on a call with you guys, as I'm chomping on the first cup of coffee. So I managed to get into ESPN after a lot of networking. I'll move through this quickly because I want to share some things about, you see this as like this whole linear thing and it looks like it's all perfect. That is complete crap. It is not. There are a lot of different things that happen, the sort of EKG of the ups and downs, and I'll share some of those. But I went to ESPN, loved it, and learned a lot. I was the person that literally met with every C-suite executive. So I was meeting with our CMO and our COO and the CEO, just trying to learn. And what I learned is, as a history major, I didn't know enough. So I went back to business school for myself, really to better understand the structures of business, which was awesome. I went into finance for a brief moment, realized that wasn't for me, and pivoted right back to tech and sports. I did have another moment in my career where I went to a great company out of North Carolina, but it didn't really suit me because, again, it wasn't at this sort of intersection of media, technology, and sports. So I started my own consulting firm. I jumped in with some friends at Players Tribune, and I now find myself at Wasserman working on Athlete Exchange. Effectively, Athlete Exchange is helping our athletes with their digital footprint. So anything on Instagram that you see that comes from our athletes, anything that's a video on Twitter. We've got folks like Russell Westbrook or Megan Rapinoe. So it's really cool to be working there after having worked in this really traditional media at ESPN. And I also started Must Love Sports in a different way this summer when folks had lost their internships, and created a program so that they could really get to learn and network and open up everyone that I've ever met, to really let them have access to learning and the stuff that we're talking about today. But I think something when you're networking that you really need to identify is why you want to talk to that person, right? And that's really difficult to kind of look inside yourself and be like, okay, what are my things? Why and what can I do to define what I'm interested in? And this is sort of what I define when somebody says, you know, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I've always operated at the intersection of media, technology, and sports. So take a minute, if you have a piece of paper or a phone, and drop a note and just like type in some things that you like to do. And then go back to them, put them into some bubbles. And it's really, you can borrow this one, I don't care. But it's really helpful when you talk to somebody, because if they can say, oh, you know, she's at Ohio, she's working on her MBA first, she's doing this next. And then after that, she's interested in media, technology, and sports. It's that elevator pitch conversation where someone can remember you immediately. So that's just something to think about as you come out of this conversation that can be super tactical. So as I mentioned, all of this stuff that we're talking about is learned over a lot of time. And the best thing you can do is keep learning. What you're looking at is my rejection letter from ESPN. So don't think that it's like this linear thing that happens. I was in college. I sent in all the things that I thought I needed to send in, and I got this from the studio production department. But I didn't stop because I got a no. I just decided, okay, I'm going to try and get in another way. And I worked on the sales team, which initially wasn't very exciting to me, but it became exciting because I learned to love it and I was where I had targeted wanting to be. So just remember that when anyone's talking to you about anything, they've worked really hard, and I know you guys will too. So let's dive into a couple things. And I'm actually going to exit my screen here so we can just talk through some of this. And apologies, I'm going to share behind the curtain. I know, I have to move my very fancy ring light here. I'm just an influencer, y'all, obviously. I see that Jackson is in Richmond, Virginia. Lots of UVA folks. You know, Jackson, I see you go to UNC, and that's okay. My husband went to Carolina, so we can have that chat offline. We don't go to the Virginia UVA, the UVA UNC game anymore because it's detrimental to our marriage. So we go to the UVA Duke game because we both, incentives are aligned there. So anyway, what I want to talk to you guys about is just some things to keep in mind. So, you know, as I had on the screen, the first one is passion breeds progress. So if you can identify what you're passionate about, and by the way, that can change a million times. Don't feel like you have to know what you want to do right now. I'm almost 36. I have no clue what I want to do, but this is really fun. So I'll keep doing stuff where I'm helping you guys and Sam and the Sports Biz crew if I can. But identify what you're passionate about, and don't apologize when you go to talk to somebody about what you want to do, because if they can help you and they can see that passion, that intersection of media, technology, and sports or whatever, then they're going to do that. So identify what you're passionate about and dig in and be unapologetic about it. When I worked at Twitter, we had these core values. So the second one is communicate fearlessly. Guys, I'm really bad at conflict. So as a manager, as learning to be a manager at Twitter, it was really nice to have the crutch to say, hey, I want to communicate fearlessly. But as I learned about that, I also learned that there's a really positive way to communicate with people if you're clear. So identify your passion and be clear about what you want to do. And if you're communicating on LinkedIn, if you're communicating via email, communicate fearlessly in the way that you're being succinct and direct. And what I mean by that is the best LinkedIn notes that I get that are totally cold say, hey, Raleigh, my name's so-and-so. Here's what I'm doing in the world. So I'm at, UNC. I'm Jackson. I'm at UNC. And I'm interested in this. I noticed you did this in your career. Are there 2 to 3 times that we can meet to discuss, and give some times over the next, call it 2 weeks? So it's very reasonable that I could say, yeah, Jackson, that sounds great. Can't wait to do it. This time works for me. Send me a calendar invite. Now, sometimes you'll communicate fearlessly, and I'll jump to sort of the bottom one. Don't be discouraged if somebody doesn't write you back. I have a rule. The rule is don't be an asshole. And there are some people out there that are sometimes assholes. Or they could be having a bad day and they're a great person. They just see it and they're really busy. So don't get discouraged. You may lob in a ton of asks, but it's okay to make those asks and maybe not get an answer. And that's the other thing. You have to ask for the order, right? You guys have been in a lot of situations, I'm sure, where if you didn't ask, whether it's ask somebody out on a date or ask to get into a class or something like that, you're not going to get an answer, right? No one's going to read your mind. So what you have to do is ask for the order. And the worst thing they can do is say no or not answer, right? And what have you lost? Nothing. So have that thick skin, totally understand that there's a lot going on in the world, but ask for that order. And then when you sit down with them, or you hop on Zoom or a phone call, be really, again, communicate fearlessly on exactly what works for them. There's a lot of Zoom fatigue. I know you guys feel it because you're likely in online classes and you're like, this is crap. I want to sit next to my classmate and listen and then do Sudoku or something. But don't do the Sudoku thing. If you're going to take the time to book time with somebody, really make sure it's meaningful time, right? Come in with some questions. And if it's the same questions that you ask of every person, once you've gotten that list together, it's totally fine. They don't know. I always ask, what's on the edge of your desk? What's the thing that you haven't gotten done that you really want to get done? Or if it's this time next year, what are you most proud of accomplishing? And what are you most disappointed if you haven't? Just come up with some questions, and those can get you into a really good conversation. And becoming a good conversationalist allows you to communicate fearlessly. So again, make that meaningful time, listen, do your best to, if you're on your phone, you're not, scrolling through Instagram. And if you're on your computer, you're really locked in and that's the only screen you have up. I know there's a lot going on, but people can sort of tell, right? My colleagues know when my Apple Watch goes off, or my dog, who again is at the door, loses his mind or something like that. And that's okay, because it's the reality of being at home, but do your best to connect as much as you can, because that'll make people really understand that you're investing as much as they are. And don't always ask maybe for 30 minutes, maybe ask for 15, whatever you can get, is really helpful. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you guys, I'm sure you are absolutely dying to screenshot this, but feel free to go ahead and just jump in and screenshot that if it's helpful. And again, talking about passion, identify what you love. Communicating fearlessly is all about being direct, and that includes offering up specific times, sharing some details, but doing it in a really relevant way. Make sure that you ask for what you want. Always listen actively. And then the rule is, again, don't be an asshole. It's very, very simple. You don't have to be, and don't worry about other people. And you'll notice in the right-hand corner, there's a little footprint. Biggest thing for me is this whole idea, is sort of how I live, is make your footprint bigger than your foot in anything you're doing, right? So if you're reaching out to someone and you get a good rapport with them, and you've got some bandwidth, some time, maybe ask them if you can help with something. And that way they start to see your work, and maybe you end up working there. If you're, on something at school, whether it's the newspaper or a sports team or some sort of other club or et cetera, do your best to dig in, because those relationships right there are the biggest networking ones. And I'm going to exit out of this. Take this. I got to learn how to be so suave and not show you guys behind the curtain. But I see some stuff in the chat here. Amazing. Thank you, ma'am, for
Yes,
dropping that
got
in.
you.
I do want to take y'all's questions, so definitely keep me honest to that. But I do want to share some stories around networking just so you guys have a little bit more understanding. And then
Rallian,
we
can
can,
I
yeah,
stop you real quick and ask a question? So,
please, I'd love to.
yes, so I love how you talked about asking them after you've already connected if you want to need any help with a project or anything. But are there any other ways after you start that initial connection to really cultivate that relationship? How do you reach back out? Are there any
Yeah,
other ways that you would think?
great question. So once you identify what you're passionate about, sometimes it's really helpful to identify the companies you're passionate about, right? The specific people that are there. And let's say it's Bleacher Report. And you and I have been on this call and I've seen, Justin Ritchie's name and I'm like, okay, cool. Justin sends me something on LinkedIn and we talk all of a sudden that, he's really into Bleacher Report. So what I would do is one, set a Google alert on Bleacher Report, follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Instagram, get as immersed in the company as you can. And then if you've gotten in touch with somebody at that organization and you've gotten really close to them, or at least exchanged a little bit, drop some relevant sort of breadcrumbs in conversation. So if you get something back on the Google alert that Bleacher Report's doing an event at the end of October, ping them and say, this looks awesome, can't wait to attend. They may not respond, but they know that you're continuing to follow the work that they're doing. It's a relevant reach out, right? It's something that's really contextual, and that's super helpful. So that's what I would say. Once you've gotten in touch with, you've kind of gotten a bite on some of those things that you've put into LinkedIn, be sure to follow up. And you can even set a calendar invite, right? So set those Google alerts, etc., or set a calendar invite once a quarter to email so-and-so from wherever. I keep sort of a working networking list, honestly, that's just a spreadsheet, and I'll put a little check and when I last spoke to them, or I'll update it, nerdily with Google, and have it auto-populate. And that way you have something that kind of holds you accountable. Now, this is all just if you really, really want to work at certain companies or you want to dig in with certain people. That's a great question, Austin.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and we've got another one in the chat from Julie. So
What's
what would
up?
you say the ideal timeline is for reaching back out if there's not a response to the initial reach out? You don't want to be annoying or nagging, but everyone gets busy.
Yeah, 1,000%. Julie, spot on. Great question. I would say it obviously varies person to person, but if you're reaching out to them in a contextual way and your language and your conversation feels patient, I know that's a tough balance to strike. So here's what I mean by that. You want to reread your stuff you send. Sometimes I'll get stuff that'll say, hey, I know you're really busy. And then there's a part of me that feels really bad because yes, everyone's busy. Everyone's got a lot going on, but you never want to be the person that doesn't respond. So maybe you send something in probably like, call it 14 business days, so like 3 weeks really is kind of like the full outreach, and send something relevant. Look for some news on Google or go to Instagram and say, if they're in content or whatever their job is, and say, I really loved this. Don't know if you had a hand in it, but again, so excited to connect. Use really positive, patient language, and then reach out probably every 3 weeks if they haven't. And if they haven't responded to you after, 4 to 5 times of outreach, maybe they're just not a networking person. Unfortunately, there are a lot of those in the world too. And that's okay. You kind of have to have a hierarchy of your priorities and identify, okay, maybe that's not one of the people that I'm going to continue to invest my time in, and sort of move along and find somebody else. But Julie, like, really, really great question.
Yeah, and just to kind of go off that, so would you say, you've reached out, maybe they're not the right person. Who would you say when you're just getting started, who to reach out to? If you want this certain job, do you reach out to that position? But again, higher up might not have as much time, so who would you say are the ideal people to reach out to initially and all of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get this question a lot because people are saying, should I reach out to the person that's likely the hiring manager, or should I reach out to the person um, that, just got out of college and is me, just a future me in a year or something like that. And I honestly think you should aim for both, but I bet you get a response from the person who was in your shoes more recently or even further. So like the interim people are in a position where they may be still establishing their career and they may not give you a response as quickly, but I do think it's really fair if you're really interested in something to just look at the hierarchy. So there may be a coordinator, and then there may be a manager, and then a senior director, or director and a senior director. But it's the people that aren't sort of leading the teams that are in the weeds and get a lot done and probably know more people on a deeper level. And this is obviously my opinion, but how I've sort of seen it play out, that can get stuff done because they know stuff about one another, or they have actively listened. Like some of the questions, even if you just know that these people have kids, like when you make your little Google calendar to email them back, I talked to somebody yesterday, it was his birthday. You can bet that's on my calendar for next year to reach out and say, hey, happy birthday, Mike. Hope you have a good one. Just those little things go a really long way. So listening to what people are saying, regardless of level, but reaching out across all levels is the best sort of kind of approach, I would say. Good to know anyone up and down.
Right. That's great. Yeah.
Bye, Jackson. I think he had to jump for class already. Go get him, man.
Yeah.
Go
So,
Who's, not heels.
right. So kind of going back, what is one way you've kind of talked about your experience of your networking? What do you think is a way that we can stand out as students and really kind of make our mark, and so they remember you or notice, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed a lot of the crew from this summer, and there were about 255 students in our program. A lot of them have started to create a very relevant LinkedIn footprint. And I think that is the most powerful place for networking right now. Now you can, follow up on a DM with a tweet. I've gotten a lot done by doing that. But making sure your LinkedIn profile is really tight. And then as you have time, like I share with our athletes, you don't have to post something every day, but engaging with stuff. So if you jumped in right now and just sort of liked some things, that's a signal, right? That's a different way, back to Julie's really good question, of outreach that doesn't count as an email. They may see that Julie liked something that they posted, and that could remind them, oh shit, Julie sent me something on chat on LinkedIn. I need to respond to that. So it's another signal to sort of poke to get people to do stuff. And I would say that creating that LinkedIn footprint is a really good way to stand out. And then having that relevant outreach, going back to, this is what I want to do. I'm very clear about it. And then sharing that you're learning about the business as much as you can. Public companies have to put out, quarterly documents. Maybe it's that you read those and you find something cool in the numbers and you ask about it. Like getting really in depth on something that you care about. And again, I don't want you guys to get so spread thin that you're doing this across like 15 or 20 companies, but identify 5 or 7 and go hard on those if those are the ones that you really love. And that way you'll know so much about them when you go to make those conversations. So the LinkedIn footprint definitely helps. And then just the deeper knowledge than somebody else that proves you're working hard is really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we'd love to just hear some of your stories and your experience. It's awesome.
Oh, I don't know about that. But you guys keep dropping questions if you have them. Again, I kept it short on the PowerPoint because no one wants to stare at those all day. But I will share some stories on the non-linear nature of sort of the networking side. So I graduated from business school and graduated in May, and I turned down my Credit Suisse offer, and I was like, I want to be in tech. I've always wanted to live in San Francisco. I'm getting on the plane. So I got on the plane, and I couldn't find a job to save my life, because when you have an MBA and you get to San Francisco and everyone's gone to Stanford, they think that you want to like manage a sales team out of the gate. And I was like, guys, never managed a sales team. Like, I only worked at ESPN and then interned. So I don't understand what on my resume says that I'm supposed to do that. So I worked at Lululemon, and I helped people with certain projects, again, asking by what's on the edge of your desk. But I set up a calendar. And on Mondays, I would dig in and do all of the hard work of networking and, look for different people to reach out to. On Tuesdays, I'd take the train down to Menlo Park, which is obviously where Google and Facebook and everyone is, different audience down there. And I'd train down, I'd meet with as many people for coffee. I mean, it was so heavily caffeinated for a period of time. Then I would take the train back up. I would reboot. I would send a follow-up, which we haven't talked about, but it's incredibly important. Always send a thank you note. Handwritten is awesome if you can do it. But certainly an email is great as well, in a timely way, in no more than 36 hours. And then on Thursdays, I would have all my meetings. And then on Friday, I would kind of give myself some time, and I would work at Lululemon or whatever. So I finally found, through someone that I knew at Virginia, a gentleman that was working in sales at Twitter. I was like, awesome. Chris has got me hooked up. He's put my name into the pot for a role. And now I'm going to talk to this great guy named Dan. He was supposed to be my boss's boss. So we get on the phone. Dan had worked at Google. And you guys are probably familiar with case interviews, where they ask you really poignant questions, as opposed to where do you see yourself in 5 years? And how can you impact our team? Which are just things you should have answers to. He started asking me how many basketballs there are in the United States, and things that you have to reason out. Well, the Blue Angels were flying overhead, those planes that do all the crazy tricks. So the tower's getting buzzed, aka my friend's apartment I'm borrowing, because I'm broke as. And he's asking me a question I don't know the answer to. So I'm flustered, I'm walking around. It does not go well. Hang up. Burst into tears. And I had a rule at the time. I was like, you only get 10 minutes to cry. You can tell it was a tough time. I was like, you only get 10 minutes to cry. So lost my stuff for a while. I was like, damn, I'm gonna have to pack up. I'm gonna have to move back home. I had a job when I left ESPN. So I called Chris and I let him know how it went. Again, calling to thank him, being gracious, saying, I can't, thank you enough for putting me in this process. And I hope I didn't let you down. And then I get an email from Dan 10 minutes later. And he's like, heard you talk to Chris. Let's try this again. I'll be in the car for the next hour.
Oh,
you just got to you just got to get your stuff together and jump in. So I jumped in, had a great conversation with Dan, and he was my boss for 4.5 years. So really what that is to tell you, one, you got to really work hard to get a job. It's, getting a job is another job in and of itself. But then two, always pay it forward with your the folks that you're networking with, like with Chris, and saying thank you, because Chris walked straight over to Dan and was like, that was a dumb move, call her back. And then also just don't get discouraged, right? Reach back, know that you're going to have to sort of put your tail between your legs and try again. And I've got a great email from Dan I didn't include in the PowerPoint, but it was the email where he said, hey, you can call me back. And I forwarded it to him about 3 years after we've been working together. And he was like, man, I was a real idiot. So glad this worked out. So, and he's now at Impossible Foods. He's been doing a lot of really cool stuff, and we're really good friends. And I see him every time I'm in San Francisco. So think about that. Think about building relationships and working with people. I don't need Dan right now, as mentioned on the networking side, but maybe I do want to work at Impossible Foods later. It's a tech company at heart. So because we have a great relationship and I did good work for him and he knows the type of person I am, I could probably reach out to him. But I haven't asked for anything but a job since, 2012. So.
Right. And did you have these connections, before you started, or can you just reach out to someone you completely have no connection with and just simply go right into it?
Yeah, honestly, you just have to reach out and again, ask, right? If you get into a conversation where you're learning a lot about somebody, let's say Julia drops me a note after this and just says, I want to connect on LinkedIn, which you wouldn't do, Julia, because you're here and you're crushing it. But if somebody just says, hey, I want to connect on LinkedIn, great, I'll just connect with you. We won't do anything else, right? You have to say, I would like to, and add some context. And anytime somebody wants to connect with you on LinkedIn who you may not have been connected with before, or you're not quite sure, always message them back and say, hey, would love to be in touch. Let's find some time. I get really weird not weird, but I get outreach from people I've never met that are already in the workforce, not folks like you. And I'm like, wonder why they want to connect with me. They're not saying anything. So you just have to, make the cold outreach, whether it's on Twitter or LinkedIn, or DMing someone on Instagram. Instagram feels a little too personal, I guess, because some people keep it not public, but if they're public, they're asking you to kind of react and engage there. So yeah, just make sure that you're reaching out to people, and then you're providing some context as to why and asking for something. Because if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Julie had another
Sure.
comment, not really a networking question, but I feel like you would be a good person to ask when you made
Y'all
the
hit me with
pivot.
anything.
Yeah. When you made the pivot in your career, how did you rebrand or brand yourself to stand out these connections?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Julie. And honestly, I would say if you have the opportunity, work in sales at some point, because you will always be selling something, right? Whether it's yourself, whether it's a product you're working on, a project you want to, elevate to your boss. So always think about that. But when I sort of pivoted, one, I had business school, which was great because that was a nice example of how I wanted to pivot. But then two, you can start to tell a story. If you go back to that linear thing for me, I started at ESPN and then I went to Twitter, which you'd think they were two totally different things, but they're not. They're both platforms that provide the ability for people to get information. It's either disseminated directly from the individual or a brand, et cetera, which is on Twitter, or it's all in one network, right? Which is ESPN. So you can start to see similarities in what you're doing and really start to build your own story. And that just takes kind of living with it and figuring it out. So if you identify what you're passionate about, you can always draw it back to that and explain your pivot. But people are really amenable to better understanding why you went somewhere. So the Players Tribune thing, for example, I started consulting with them, but everyone that worked at Players Tribune was someone I'd worked with at Twitter or back at ESPN. So once you've worked with great people, sometimes the story of your pivot is because you just want to go work with the same great people again, right? And that happens to be a good product. So really think about your story, identify what you're passionate about, and from there you can start to put together and sell whatever it is as a pivot or the idea of what you want. Does that help, Julie? Let me know if I didn't get there. Hold me accountable here.
No, that's awesome. Also, just curious, I know you mentioned earlier about how you have your own networking spreadsheet. I think that's awesome and something we can all start ourselves, but
Yeah.
what is all included on there? I know you like, oh, if they say their birthday, write that down. What all is
Yeah. If it's dates, honestly, I put those on the calendar just because it's a lot more helpful. Or like I had a call on Monday, one of my friends said that she was having surgery on this day. Like those things that can be put onto the calendar, I do. But on the spreadsheet, it's just got, their name, their current email. And then I just take notes really from our conversation. So I usually am taking them with like a pencil or a pen rather, and some paper so that I don't look like I'm typing during a conversation. Some people will lead with, hey, I'm going to take some notes if you hear me typing. Think on that, because people think that you may be sending an email, particularly right now, going back to that active listening and sort of meaningful time. But it's got the name, it's got the email, and then it's got those notes. So I can go back and be like, Mike, 2 kids, 7 and 9, just kind of better understanding. And then also remembering where we left off. So in case they jump off the phone or in case stuff sort of slows down, I've got a better remembering, hopefully you're talking to a lot of people. So that's a problem you have, and that you just don't know what was said in the last conversation, et cetera. And then I also will put some notes around their past career, if they, played soccer or something that they said that wasn't on LinkedIn, because you always want to do that LinkedIn stalking, but it's not that you want to really dive in. And say like, oh, I saw you were in this club at this time, right? There's a little bit more delicate balance to that. So listing some of that stuff to give, like we've talked about, some contextual and relevant details is really a positive way. There's a program called Salesforce that a lot of organizations use, and it's basically you're creating your own Salesforce to be able to track those conversations.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So when you were first getting started out, I mean, whether you're an undergrad, did you start that early, and were you sending the emails? Was it a little easier in person? How did that work for you?
Yeah, obviously if you're in school, you're probably, unless you're in a certain area or not maybe in market. I wanted to be in New York. I was in Charlottesville. I wasn't obviously in market. So most of it was happening via email anyway. And it's always nice. And obviously right now it's an interesting time to offer to meet in person. If someone's open to having the socially distanced coffee or something right now, definitely tee it up, because people would much prefer human contact at this point, but it's just really difficult to have. So no, most of it was still very much virtual, and always asking for how they like to be communicated with. And by the way, this is something that you can use at school with your teams, or if you're, on a project or whatever. Knowing how people like to communicate. Like, I've got a person on my team that reports to me who would much prefer to be on Slack and text, and isn't really a Zoom, FaceTime kind of person. Totally fine. We do a FaceTime once a month just because I want to check in, but he didn't really like that. So, well, that's how we communicate. So asking if they would prefer to just communicate over email, if you want to give them a call, if you want to do a video, being specific, again, going back to being direct and communicating fearlessly, is really helpful. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but making sure to have that outreach and then identify how they want to be spoken to is really important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Julie made the comment that it did help. She's in a pivot from 20-year food and beverage career back in school for sports. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So Julie, interesting story from this summer. One of the students that was in the program is kind of in the same boat as you, but she was in finance for about 15 years. And she realized, I don't want to be in finance. I want to be in sports. I always have been. So she managed to find an unpaid, and I know that that's difficult for some folks, but she found an unpaid internship through a friend of mine that I introduced her to, and she just took a job with them. So being able to sort of offer that food and beverage experience, like, for example, Levy's is the company that provides most of the food and beverage to stadiums. Now they're in a difficult position right now, but that's a perfect sort of, you've been in food and beverage, or you've been in this world, Budweiser, all these other places that have sponsorships need your expertise, right? And you can tell them that story. You can say, here's what I've been doing. I understand this world. Let me help you with how you're approaching this other world that I want to be in now. And that you can think about that. Anyone that's got kind of an approach to what they want to be doing. That's awesome. Good for you. Got some badasses on the call, Austin.
I know. Look at that. Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if anyone else has any other questions they want to drop in, it's great. Let's see. Oh, never mind. But
that was me. That was me giving her a thumbs up.
Oh, good. Yeah. Let's see.
Anything else, team?
Yeah, we've got one.
Christian. Ooh, okay. What's up?
How often would you recommend reaching out to your network?
It's a good question. If you have something, like I said, that's relevant, go ahead and lob it in. But I think reaching out just about quarterly really works. And for your sort of core people. So let's say you go through the exercise of creating that spreadsheet and you get to know enough people and you've really gotten a rapport. Let's say there's like 40 people on that list, but you've got a really good rapport with like 5 or 7 of them. That can be monthly, right? That can be something where you just drop in, hey, here's what I've been up to. Wanted to give you the latest. Still loving it where I am, or I'm about to graduate. Here's what I'm looking into, etc. And those can start to be your really deep relationships where you may end up texting that person more frequently, etc. But once a quarter is fine for the more general stuff, and then once a month for the people that you've sort of prioritized as your kind of go-tos, right? Your sort of dream team.
Yeah, no, that's great. Good to go.
Indeed. Yeah, Christian, I saw you say creating a top 5 question mark. Yeah, I think that's, and let me know if I'm not on point with answering this, but I think that's just kind of great to create not only your top 5 businesses you like, and then a couple people within that business, but then the top 5 sort of crew that you feel most connected to, that you have the best conversations with, and really are learning the most from. Because then, you're reverse investing in each other.
Yeah. And would you say that just starting off looking at LinkedIn, as far as you kind of have an idea, or just like doing your research online, or how would you say to go about finding those?
Yeah. So here's a good example. Yesterday, Amari Cooper is one of our athletes, and I wanted to make sure that I was in touch with the Cowboys social and content team, just so they know who I am and how much I'm working with Amari. So honestly, just go into the search function, social Dallas Cowboys, and it pulled up 3 different people for me. So if you kind of know what you're searching for, which is going back to identifying those companies and figuring out a little bit more about who you are and what you want to do, you can find them there. So yeah, LinkedIn is a good place to start. And then I do always look at their school. That's a really, I love UVA. I have, a conversation all of a sudden with Jackson because he's in the ACC. It's just a good connection point. Or if they're in the same place in the world, like let's say they live in New York, and you can say, oh, what area do you live in New York? and they say, and all of a sudden you're talking about a restaurant or something, right? You're diving into something that's business out of the gate. So yeah, I would say LinkedIn as the initial research, and then you can just sort of do the search about the business, so you look a lot more informed there.
Right. Makes sense. All right. Well, that was absolutely great, Raleigh, and thank you so
Well, I hope
much.
so. Thanks, guys. The sun's
Yes.
finally coming up here, so we'll get a little bright. But thank you
Yes.
so much for the time, y'all. I know it's busy AF. So as mentioned, reach out on LinkedIn and make sure you're asking me for something.